Good evening and welcome to another Pharaoh stream with myself, Pharaoh, and my most illustrious theatrical guest, Simon Roberts. Good day,
Oh,
sir.
you are far too kind. Thank you very much. Good evening, Pharaoh. Nice to be here again.
Yes, it's good to be back. It's been a little while since I've done a stream. I now have decided that I'm just doing it whenever I have the gusto and feel the muses speak to me to come on and chat about stuff. But I guess the whole reason for the stream tonight is Simon and I recently saw a play at the Alma Mater Theatre in Islington, and wanted to do a quick review of what it was like, because in terms of the choice, maybe we should talk about the choice, because
why did we choose this? I mean, was it just that it was there, it was available, and it sort of caught our eye because of the subject matter?
Yeah, exactly. Like Simon and I occasionally like to pop into town and see what the best London has to offer theatrically.
Well, yeah.
And again, basically, for those who don't know, post-COVID, the quality has massively declined. Although I do have a thing now, Simon, where I think they're sort of trying to play the hits a little bit. Where
Yes.
I saw that they're bringing the Lehman trilogy back. There's
interesting.
People, Places, Things, which was another big hit a couple of years ago.
That's interesting.
I've heard rumours that they're gonna. There's currently a music performance of "Merrily We Roll Along" with Daniel Radcliffe in it, and I heard they're going to I heard on the grapevine they're going to transfer that to the West End. To the West End. So I think there's a bit of like woke being put away in a more general sense in the theatrical landscape. But if you were to look at the off West End theatres and what they have to offer, you wouldn't be able to tell that is the case. And that was a long way around of saying that basically
we were scraping for something.
Yeah, theatre is low woke, and it's really it's not even like I don't know, because I can appreciate theatre from the other side. Like if you think about Brecht or Sartre or something like that, I can appreciate theatre from the dark side, and that there's always interesting things around the staging, etc. So I'm not averse to, like, I'm not an ideologist when it comes to theatre, but it's the combination of, yes, it's woke, but it's also just like absolute slop at the same time, just like just bait, just like they know that the liberal London boomers are going to just be lapping every single second of it up again. So there isn't a lot. And then the way that they made it look like was, I actually got a little bit confused. So the Alma Mater Theatre is a very well respected, I would say there's off West End, and then there's kind of like even beyond that. I mean, it's quite, the actual theatre location's deep into Islington. This is Corban territory, but also this is kind of like the Lovey zone. When I used to live nearby, many people living in North London would be sort of anchored around it. So it's kind of like, I would describe it as the actors theatre, if that makes sense. And they had a big picture of a painting that had been desecrated, that had scratches on it, and I just instantly presumed it that's combined with the title, which is obviously Alma Mater, which is like a colloquialism for the university that you went to. I thought it was to do with the iconoclasm that happened about 3 or 4 months ago, where a guy sliced a
picture of Balfour at Cambridge, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Interesting. I looked that up because I thought the same thing, that was an allusion to that. But it looks like what they've done is they've done a restage, because it's on the advertising for the play. It's not the picture of Balfour, and they've obviously just tried to recreate a similar look by getting an actress, it looks like, to slash another painting of a old white man, and so they've actually not used the original pictures from that incident. So it's further away from that even, but as you say, it doesn't even kind of relate to the play that we're seeing either.
No, exactly. So I thought it was going to be a bit about almost like a question of iconoclasm and ideology. How does that play out? What's off limits? I think that's quite an interesting, furtive, creative zone and space. Sadly, it was not that, but I think it's worth.
We were taken in. It's theatrical clickbait. That's what it was.
That is actually so true. But maybe do you want to? I think we're going to do this by just giving a brief overview of what the play was like, and then talk about a couple of moments and scenes from it, and then give our review off the back of it. But Simon, is there anything else to say about the setting and the kind of run up to the actual show itself?
Yeah, some of the context around the play is interesting to talk about. Whether we'll get to all of the stuff I'm thinking of talking about is another matter. But I mean, the Alma Mater Theatre, it's an interesting house. It was originally constructed in 1837. Yes, I'm reading this off notes I've taken off Wikipedia. But it used to be the Islington Literary and Scientific Society, including a library, a reading room, a museum, laboratory, and a lecture theatre. And it was designed by these architects, Robert Louis Romieux and Alexander Dick Goff. Basically, they were sort of trad historical eclecticists, and they did.
The person's name was Dickoff.
Yeah, Dick Goff.
Oh, Dick Goff. Oh, okay. So.
They were specialists in kind of sort of recreation of historical styles, kind of early English, Norman, Tudor revival, Victorian Gothic styles. And it's interesting when we got there, because I was commenting to you when we saw the last play we did at the Royal Court, they've chosen this obviously very stripped back setting. So you notice in the theatre that it's got a sort of curved stone wall at the back of the theatre, and you were wondering, well, is that part of a set, or is that just the building? But it is part of the building. So it's got this sort of faintly industrial kind of air about it, as if it's a bit like the Roundhouse. It might have once had some industrial kind of purpose or something like that. But I think that's more part of the current trend for a sort of sub-Brechtian kind of theatre, to sort of take away the pretense and the artifice. There's no illusion here, and you sort of see theatre in that Brechtian way as kind of theatre is a kind of production of something. It's taking I mean, these are kind of message plays, these sorts of things that we're seeing here. So it's done in that very sort of, if you like, clinical and forensic style. And what we have there is quite a similar setup to the Royal Court, a very sort of steep galleried auditorium. And you have this sort of long concave wall at the back of the stage. You have a very, very simple set. Do you want me to go through that, sort of describe what it was like in that way?
Please do.
Yeah. So we're sort of I'm sort of, I'm very conscious when you walk into a theatre, we've been for years very film conscious, where, the director's eye intends for you to see what they want you to see deliberately. And as I say, you notice very much that the theatres now, you tend to walk in, it tends to be this, we're going for this very simple, unadorned set. There's nothing illusionistic or escapist. And what we've got in this particular case is it's a very sort of simple rectangular thrust stage, and this sort of gallery at the back of that, which is this concave stone wall, and the main stage itself is it's like a lateral cross section of a building, with the lid taken off, so to speak. So you're sort of within the confines of the main setting is this prestigious traditional university, and it's as if we've lifted the lid off and we're watching these characters, almost as if they're in a sort of a box or even a sarcophagus of some kind.
I was thinking petri dish, because again there's they're in, there's lots of circles as well, but there was definitely something clinical and
that stainless steel floor as well.
Yes, yeah. I would say that the staging I've been to the Almeida many a time before, was probably one of their more starker ones. They normally have a little bit more, but they definitely go down that kind of like derelict but unironic
Yes.
that style, but they never go full like black box basically.
Yeah, yeah. I think in this case, it's been done very deliberately. Like I say, it's a sort of Marxist theatrical style. It presents itself as like honesty and a lack of concealment, if you know what I mean. It sort of fixates on the sort of authenticity of the building. It's stripped back in nature, like it's like a factory or a workspace. And you have this, as I say, very plain rectangular thrust stage. It's bounded all around by what looked like plain metal frame modular school desks, the sorts that we would have sat at school, with a couple of small gaps in the rectangle as entrances. And these entrances lead up to the back of the stage where, as I say, there's this concave gallery where characters are sitting also on these desks. These things double as desks, I suppose, and seating. And characters mainly move into the fore stage, which is the sort of arena for confrontations, and that setting obviously shifts in the nature of, it becomes a staff room or a college hall or a student common room, things like that. It's like a sort of sunken quad that you're looking down into, and around the perimeter of it internally is a series of there's lights essentially that come on and activate when they want to draw focus to a character having a monologue, or there's a kind of scene change where they particularly they use this choral music, which is this sort of keening, mournful sort of wash of sound that comes up at times between the scenes. So
just two things I want to say. Firstly, that's a really good point about the allusions to the quad. I thought that was quite a clever analogy. Again, the university that it's set in is meant to be like an Oxbridge, quite like they often talk about tradition and the fact that there's a chapel on the site. Like again, this is the whole thing is imaginary. It's like an ersatz for. You can fill in the university yourself, kind of thing. But again, I think the idea of the quad's interesting. With the music, there was something absolutely horrible about it because it wasn't really choral in the like something like Talus that
it wasn't beautiful. No,
yeah, no, exactly. It was very like they obviously, but even the kind of singing, it was more kind of like I don't know how I imagine some kind of horrible siren song or something like that. Disharmonic.
It's like an eerie,
wailing,
mournful swirl. Yeah, keening that comes up now and again. Yeah. And the thing about the university itself is you see it as it's a college within a university, but the rest of the university sort of isn't alluded to. So you don't get the sense it's part of when you think of a prestigious institution, you might think of Oxford or Cambridge, you might think of Magdalen College or something like that, but you don't have any sense of connection to a bigger institution. It seems almost as if the focus is this place is particularly special, and even one of the characters refers to it as being, this is like Hogwarts or something. So it's made out to be very sort of super exciting, super kind of magical in some way. But of course, all of that is stripped back. We're denied all of that. There's nothing to present us with any of that. So that's all rendered sort of unimportant.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, I think that was one downside of the set decisions, because despite all of this chat about Hogwarts and they mentioned about the use of gowns for dinners and traditions, etc. So obviously, definitely that kind of Oxbridge style. Because everyone dressed normally, the whole vibe of it felt more like an Essex Polytechnic rather than a austere English. And I just couldn't. I kept being drawn back to that, and I feel like that was a mistake in terms of set design. So there was that disconnect for me. But anyway, Karen.
I think that's deliberate. There's something about it that we get onto I've made sort of notes about costumes that the characters wear, because I think again they're very deliberate in that way. But going back to the setting, the thing you have as I say, you have this main forestage, and looking over it is this sort of galleried area at the back where the characters are sitting along this curved wall. And this curved wall is sort of divided into 8 little alcoves with a light over the top of each alcove, and that is where the characters sit. They retire from the stage once they've done their scene, and in a Brechtian style, they sit there, they retire to the back, and they watch the action on the forestage. And this is like a sort of inverse audience setting that we are watching them, and they are sort of watching the action back as well. And it's very much one of those sort of tropes that is like, they're witnesses at some sort of, a trial of some kind. It's a sort of typical, accusatory trope that you get in this sort of deconstructed theatre. There's no sort of offstage world or anything like that that's being simulated. There's no sense of, anything other than there is just liminal zone after that, a sort of non-space where they just go and hang out and they witness the action, and we are therefore sort of meant to be reflecting on what they're reflecting on as well. And so they're not connected to the space permanently in a sense. And that's kind of part of one of the themes of the play, is connection of people to place, as we'll sort of see. But anyway, they sort of hover in anticipation at the outside. So you notice that they're in these alcoves. There are 7 actors in the play. In the first part of the play, mostly there's just 6 actors on stage. So 2 of the alcoves are uninhabited. One of the alcoves has got a portrait in it, which we'll talk about later, and the other alcove is uninhabited. And this alludes to a character in the play who has died, who's been murdered some time before the events of the play, and who is significant to the sort of some of the motive, if you like, of some of the characters in there. But what you've got is this portrait of this slightly eerie looking Victorian woman in a green dress, hands on lap, looking out at us, and you're wondering, well, what's that about? That's some sort of element of the past that's been left there to kind of, disconcert us slightly. And what happens throughout the play is, as the action goes on throughout, down in the forestage, in the pit, if you like, this quad, that starts to break up in form, and the desks start to reconfigure, and it starts to lose its shape. Gaps emerge, the desks are pulled out and used for other things. So by the end of the play, the order, the relationships, the collegiality have all kind of broken down, and that's kind of being mirrored in that set. And we notice that as the play goes on, there are fewer and fewer actors sitting in the back in their alcoves. They're just disappearing off stage somewhere else, as if they're recusing themselves from the action. The other thing, as I said, is there are these lights around the bottom of the quad which light up when characters step into it, and they're used in a way to also create a sense of digital space, because a lot of the play it's like an epistolary novel. It's told in letters, so the play is told in people reading emails, or at certain points
blog posts,
blog posts, things like that. So that creates this little abstracted space from the real world where the lights come up, and they address the ether with whatever they're having to write about online, stuff like that. So that's more or less the set. It's very, very, very simple, very stark, and exposed, and again, as you say, there's no sort of ornamentality, adornment, or beauty in it, and you sense that they're trying to force your eye into that notion that none of that is important. What's important here is purely this kind of, like, it's like a Marxist, like a class struggle thing that's going on. That's what we're meant to be focusing on.
That's a really good analysis. I hadn't even thought about that. So okay, well, should we get into the meat a bit? So I think I don't think we're going to go through it line by line, but certainly like broader strokes and different scenes. And
do you want to talk a little bit about the playwright before we go on?
Oh yes, yeah, go on.
Do you want to jump into that? The playwright's a lady called Kendall Fever. She's an Australian playwright. She's born in 1990, so that probably makes her sort of late millennial. She's went to a sort of private school in New South Wales, very pleasantly appointed. Everybody seems to have their own MacBook and all this kind of stuff. I mean, basically, then she comes to London. She goes to Goldsmiths, which is art college, famous art college, leftist hive of scum and villainy. And she does an MA in playwriting. These are just factoids I've surmised by looking at interviews and things about her. She's very in love with Star Trek Voyager, apparently, and I think that's the Star Trek with the girl boss captain. And I also found that in another interview, she admitted to having complex mental health issues. And I'm just leaving those little factoids there, But the main thing is that she's kind of on a career path which is going all the way to places like the National Theatre and the RSC, and then West End transfers. She's kind of doing the circuit of what you do when you come out to England. You do attachments at the fringe theatres. Like she's done attachments at the Bush Theatre, National Theatre Studio, and then she's gone around the country to various other places. She's the Traverse in Edinburgh, the Arcola in London, all these kinds of, things that you do as your journeyman apprenticeship towards essentially becoming a kind of featured national playwright. It's kind of clear that she's kind of on or being propelled on that sort of path. The interesting thing I was looking at about her was she got a real sort of springboard from winning something called the Bruntwood Prize. And she got the Bruntwood Prize is the biggest playwriting prize in Europe. It's about £40,000 every year, and it's divided up into 3 sections, essentially: the best playwright, the best international play, and a judge's prize. And she won a judge's prize, which is about £8,000, which is a decent fist of money. Now, the Bruntwood organisation is interesting because it's a property development company. And it's very interested, it says, in creating, spaces, for people to live in, but in a very much a way that is geared towards sort of social justice themes, harmony and diversity, and all of the stuff we're familiar with. They say things like everything we do is tied into our vision of building vibrant communities and so on. While at the same time, honoring fairness, equality, and all of these sorts of things, sustainability, all these things kind of come up. So there's a few actually Bruntwood alumni in the British playwriting scene. And it's very interesting that, in a sense, this is a modern form of patronage. This kind of, corporate agenda that is having a part of it reserved for culture funding. They also do a science and technology funding stream, this Bruntwood organisation, but they're in tandem.
Is it Bruntwood?
Bruntwood, yes. Okay. Yes, the Bruntwood Prize. You can have a look at that.
Can I just say that all the schizos on the internet right now, they're focusing on the Donald Trump various conspiracy theories. Yeah. The real hardcore conspiracy theorists are looking at how housing organizations are controlling fringe UK theatre right now.
It's interesting. It's interesting, yeah, because this is this modern patronage. In Shakespeare's time, it would be the Earl of Essex or something, that would give you some funding, or the Lord Chamberlain. But here it's property developers actually. And you look at the website, and in a way, strangely, there's lots of pictures on the website which are it's almost very similar people and settings to what we see in this play in a weird way. And I'm not suggesting she's kind of doing their bidding directly in that way, but it's thematically. They're very much, they say they're supporting initiatives which tackle systemic inequalities and their impact on people's lives and communities. They've got all kinds of worthy sorts of funds and assistances they do with their partners, the Oglesby Charitable Trust. And the Oglesby family are the ones who own the Bruntwood Company, essentially. And this is their sort of, arts, culture and funding arm. And they sponsor playwrights. And as I say, it's the biggest playwriting prize in Europe. And so she seems to have got a lot of, sort of help out of that. But she's also reflecting when she talks in interviews about her plays. She talks about, doing a lot of research. So she's an interesting character there's not much interesting about her. She's one of the people who does the plays by doing a lot of research and then feeding that into her plays. And you can sense an authorial voice in some ways, but in the other way, though, it's sort of almost scientific. It's describing a human situation by PowerPoint almost. And she talks about having stakeholders in her plays. That's a bit of an alarm word. She has a few quotes I found about her. She says, "My job as a playwright is not to argue anyone's side. It's to find the story." I mean, that's the kind of sort of boilerplate, disingenuous statement, isn't it? It's the one of artistic impartiality. that people make when they're playwrights. I mean, reminder, there are no impartial playwrights. She says the internet is fantastic for politics, but it takes nuance out of difficult conversations. And I never thought that any topic is sacred. The more important something is, the more it should be interrogated. So it's the sort of thing you get from universities of question everything. But of course, they don't really believe in questioning everything at all. I wrote the kind of play I wanted to see. Not one, but 3 women having conversations on stage about something other than a man. And apparently she was, her old school reports say she was quite bossy and attention seeking. And she said she was shocked by that. She said, well, you could flip that and say, I have leadership potential or vivid imagination, but there you go. She that's the sort of character she is. So in a sense, she's the sort of perfect vessel for, as I say, the kinds of agendas that we're all familiar with are being pushed through culture. And it's just a small example of how, the sensibility required to get the money to get to where you want to go does kind of depend on playing up to that kind of interest. I mean, she originally started writing plays about young people with mental health conditions, and to an extent that kind of sort of features in this play as well, in a way, because that's just seeped into the culture of the young, I think, in a very observable sense. So that's just brief thing about her, really. She's done this play, and also, being the Almeida, I mean, do you remember the last play we saw? They had we had a laugh because they had an intimacy coordinator.
Oh Lord,
Now
Lordy.
there's nothing like this for this production, but in this production, what they had was a production drama therapist.
Oh my
This
goodness.
is interesting.
What do they do? What do they do, Simon?
Well, a lady called Wabria King, and what she is
King by name,
she's
no doubt, by nature.
we was drama therapists. I briefly looked her up because it was just quite funny to me. I thought, what is a drama therapist as well? I'll just read some quotes for her. She just says, through her practice, Wabria has recognized the body's frequent inability to differentiate between reality and performance. This means that in the unique environment of the rehearsal room, the actor is subject to the same stressors inherent within the piece. Wabria creates a therapeutic confidential space so that performers can safely explore where fiction blurs with their reality. Wabria continues to build upon our understanding of the body's somatic response to trauma through further study with the Institute of Embodied Psychotherapy. And she's got things like, actors need to remind their bodies that it's not real. So essentially, it's this thing of they're beginning to see and treat performance as something traumatic, and the actors of need decompress themselves with this drama therapist when it's as if they can't cut between the play and reality anymore. So the feeling is that people are getting in so deep to these things that they're slightly traumatized by the process, and she's there to kind of help them sort of adjust again. But she has a lot of clients and she has a lot of work, and it's part of this new sort of trend in theatres to these made up jobs. I mean, we all have heard, if we've sort of looked at theatre or performance, there's classic stories about actors. Obviously the famous one about Dustin Hoffman and Laurence Olivier in Marathon Man, a scene where Dustin Hoffman is being interrogated and he's in a terrible, absolutely run to he's completely run down. He's been sort of tortured and so on. And the story is famously that Hoffman stayed up for like 3 nights not sleeping to get into the state of dishevelment required for the scene. And when he came on set, Olivier is alleged to have said, "Why don't you just act? Why do you have to do this method thing of suffering?" So I think it's that's just another interesting aspect there of just a completely sort of useless annex to the creative crew that I can't see myself is really needed.
I think what we're seeing is the sort of millennialization of these kind of spaces, because I am seeing more and more kind of millennial playwrights come through for big slots like this. I would say Amida is a pretty big slot. So you're, like you said, you're doing well on your pathway if you've got a booking with those guys. And it's just interesting again the idea of acting is a trauma or whatever. This, but it is just you're just acting though. So anyway,
Yeah, everything that is being created culturally has to be done so within a therapeutically supportive space. That's a
it's very
strange idea
dark.
to me.
Yeah, I find it very
It
dark.
is. Yeah, yeah. But anyway, that was flummery. We can get on to the play.
Yes. No, that was. I think that's important. Again, just to kind of explain about it. So, as I remember it, so correct me as we're going through this. As we're going through this, we kind of begin with focus on, I guess, probably the main character. I would say really a middle-aged woman called Jo. Is that correct?
Yeah. She's the head of the college.
Yes, and we don't know anything about her at this time, and she starts reading a rude letter featuring various names and nicknames for vaginas. In a kind of a shock jock start to the
it's a commencement
to the play.
speech that she's giving. Yeah.
Yes, which we find out later, and then she kind of during the speech she kind of reveals that when she first came to the college, so the university was her alma mater, that they had just allowed women to join the college, and she had a letter warding her off and saying that they're not going to tolerate women being around into her room. And so she then gave a reply, which was as equally as crass and vulgar in its kind of beginning part, and kind of basically kind of positions this character Jo as kind of a powerful, I guess you'd say second wave feminist. Basically,
she's a feisty woman.
Yeah, in the 80s or something like that, maybe.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like there isn't much explained apart from you get the idea that she is doing this kind of big speech to a room full of students, and again she's just been brought on this year as well. So I guess this kind of initial scene is you're meant to kind of get the shock. I just felt like there is a lot of this kind of like sweary middle classness or whatever, especially in millennial culture, which thinks that like if you swear, that somehow it is like just in its own right quite a funny and shocking thing. While in my mind, it's the most benign and like base thing. It's just like it just doesn't have any value or power anymore. So like, why would you even say it? But
it's that thing that people have identified recently, is that there's that type of person. I won't say the word necessarily unless you want me to, but the type of person that's been identified on Twitter that's basically a sort of getting towards middle age or middle-aged lefty, and they always put in their bio a bit sweary. It's that sort of Stephen Fry thing from a few years ago. Swearing is big and it is clever.
No, exactly. Like apart from again, that's you already sort of dated yourself. Again, it was interesting all the way through this. You just through that very act. Sorry, Karen.
Yeah. No, as you say, that's correct. I was going to identify what you're talking about there. It is dated. It's interesting. I was doing a bit of reading for this stream because basically, without it's not revealing too much, that feminism is a kind of theme in this play, and I was reading about second and third wave and fourth wave feminism just to get a sort of broad overview. And this was a thing that was done in the sort of early to mid 90s, that they were trying to do. They were trying to reappropriate these words and take back the power, all that kind of stuff. And things like the word bitch, for example, There was a there was a song called "All Women Are Bitches," which was done by a woman band called Fifth Column. And there was a book by Elizabeth Wurtzel, I remember it at the time, called "Bitch," in praise of difficult women. So there's all this thing of trying to sort of, reconquista these vulgar words, and we're going to take ownership of them, and we're no longer going to be afraid. And there's this sort of lineage in the kind of feminism that this particular character is part of.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, then it switches across to a teachers' meeting. So this is
it's Joe and Michael.
Yes. So do you want to talk about who Michael is?
Yeah. So Michael, Professor Michael Danfield, he is he's part of the board of the college. He's how would you put it? He's a sort of chairman of the board of the college. So he hired Joe to come and work at this college. She is the master of the college, but he is the sort of the Uber director above that. And he is very much. We should talk about perhaps the look of the characters. He's very much boomer coded. I remember I said to you that if you want to think of him, he reminds you very much of the Roger Allam character in The Thick of It. That sort of kind of boomer who's trying to cling on maybe a bit too tightly to his fading youth, but he still has a sort of swash of Oh yes, I can hear you. Yeah. Are you still there?
Yes. Sorry, I think one of us cut out there. So do you want to say that again? Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So we're talking about Professor Michael Danfield, this character. He's boomer coded, and he's a bit like the Roger Allam character in The Thick of It. He's still sort of got his hair. He's probably dyed his hair, but he dresses slightly too young. He's got his tight jeans and a stretch shirt. They're slightly too tight for a man of his age. Suede desert boots. That's a classic boomer style. It's sort of the lover boy gone to seed. Interestingly, the actor who played him played Inspector Linley, one of those kinds of detective dramas. And as a younger man, he was sort of lined up for lots of smouldering TV heartthrobs. But basically, he is the kind of overall director of the college. And he and Joe are having an argument in this scene about she wants to create a multi-faith prayer room in the college. Now, Joe herself, she's very much, she dresses in a kind of 90s style. She looks like, sort of women did back in the 90s that I remember. Crushed silk blouse, high trousers, ankle boots. It was kind of what a lot of girls wore who were trying to project a sort of restrained elegance, but with a bit of edge, that kind of thing. So it's a fight they're having about creating a multi-faith prayer room. And the options are that they either use one of the rooms in the college, and Michael's telling her, no, we can't do that, or that they repurpose the Christian chapel and take out all of the Christian elements of it,
yeah,
and make it into a sort of generic spiritual space. And Michael's not having any of this. Go on.
Just quickly on this. A few things. We're going to do analysis afterwards, so maybe just crack on.
Yeah. So they're having this argument about this particular issue, and Michael comes across very much as somebody wanting to wallow a bit in the tradition of the college and celebrate that, and also he learns from Joe that students are having sex in the chapel, this precious chapel that they have, and he's aghast at this. He's clearly not comfortable with the way things are heading, but Joe is this influence trying to create a more I suppose more sort of right on ecumenical kind of atmosphere in the college. So there's a little bit of tension there. That's interrupted by a student who comes in to meet with Joe, and this student is another, if you like, key character, and she's called Nikki. She's a young mixed race woman, and she's studying journalism, and she's got this sort of fire of a true zealot about her. And we gather from her kind of intensity that she's come to meet Joe to talk about an issue with some of the boys in the college. And essentially what's happening is we're coming up to Freshers' Day, and the boys in the college who organize the social clubs have been looking up the freshers, and they've basically set up a kind of who would you do competition on the freshers, and this kind of do-gooder sort of busybody character Nikki comes in, and she wants Jo to do something about it, and she wants her to sort of punish these lads. And the scene more or less shakes out as Jo is a bit of a, there's a bit of a sort of libertarian thing about her. She doesn't want to go in so hard. She declines being authoritarian, and she's trying to tell Nikki to lighten up a bit, because Nikki's obviously a bit of an uptight sort of hall monitor character, and the emphasis she puts to her is, you're at college, try and have fun, and that's mostly the summary of that particular scene.
Mm-hmm. And then. Yeah, and then after that, we've got the arrival of a couple of other characters. Gary
Paige and Gerald.
Oh, Gerald. Sorry, yeah, that's right. Gerald is a Malaysian Muslim man who, but he's kind of like.
He's anglicized. He's obviously
he's trying to blend in, isn't he? Basically, with his surroundings is the idea behind his character. Basically, the Welsh girl, both him and Nikki are in their second year, and there's a bit of chemistry between the two, or they were friends in the previous year and then didn't hang out. Yes. But this Welsh girl is a new fresher. I got to be honest, I found her character unbelievably cringy. We are gonna maybe we'll stop at the halfway break and we can do some analysis so we don't forget this stuff. But she introduces herself as a gamer, and I literally just as soon as she said that, I sort of doubled over in the audience. I felt physically embarrassed for everyone on the stage for having to say that line.
And she's studying computer science as well, which you find equally implausible, because the way she is projected as a character. I mean, and no offense to our Welsh audience, but as I said to you, you often see this in programs on telly and in theatre, that Welshness is a code for bringing on someone who's basically mentally subnormal.
I could be honest with you, that there was definitely an element of that where I felt like, they're just totally slamming the Welsh here. Basically, I mean, they made her out to be like a complete and utter bumpkin, basically. So I thought it was very, very unfair. Like just on the computer science thing. When asked why did she decide to do that, she was like, "Oh, because I didn't want to let all the boys have the fun," or something like that. It was just
you sense she's actually doing it to be near the boys. Actually, it's sort of hinted at.
I don't know. Like the most unbelievable character ever, and also again, like I said, slightly insulting to the Welsh. There, I felt a little bit, only a modicum bad, but like you said, I do feel like they do get kind of rolled out as the stupid character, don't they?
It is kind of a traditional. It goes back to Shakespeare. You look at a character like Llewellyn in Henry V, and they are seen as the sort of comic relief. And she particularly has an emphatically sing-songy Welsh accent as well. I'm not going to try and do it, but it is one of those. It's like it's the most irritating Welsh accent. It doesn't. How can I put it? I meet Welsh people. I speak to Welsh people. It doesn't feel authentic. They don't lean into the Welshness very much. They just
some of my friends. I have several Welsh friends.
But the interesting thing is, in the stage directions of the play, actually, the character is pretty flexible, because the playwright said she could possibly be Northern Irish or Scottish. And the other characters are described interestingly. Michael, the professor, is described as British. Nikki, the student, he's obviously mixed race, she's described as dual heritage. But next to her name is put English, which is interesting. So Michael is British, but Nikki, who's obviously mixed race, is designated as English. So there you go. And Gerald is Malaysian, etc. And Jo, the main character herself, she could be anything. She's British, or possibly American, Australian, or New Zealander. She's basically shorthand for Anglo.
I was going to say, as soon as you mentioned that the writer was from Australia, again, I mean, Simon, you have a much better experience with Australians than I do. But however, I I instantly thought of her as an Australian character. Uh, it's a specific kind of Australian archetype, which is that kind of quite bold and I know quite forward. There's something very un-English about her nature and the way she speaks as well. So in my head, there was already like some kind of weird alarm bells going off. So as soon as you said that the writer was Australian, I felt like, okay, that's exactly where she got it from. But
there is something not quite right tonally in as you say. But I mean, I see this is a kind of journeyman work, as I say, for the playwright on her way to, greater things.
Okay, cool. And then we basically, that's the kind of setup with the students. It's kind of like there's a bit of a thing between Gerald and the Welsh girl, where he's kind of like tries to be nice to her, etc. Give her a pack. There's a bit of tension there, and then Nikki complains about the activities, and they reveal that the freshers' party is the theme is what were you wearing?
When they raided the brothel.
When they raided the brothel. Yes.
So it's kind of Vickers and Tarts kind of the sort of stuff you have when you're a fresher at university. They organize a slightly louche kind of like a toga party or something like that. It's obviously essentially, rather than giving people Rohypnol and drug raping each other, they just get them into a party situation where everything is kind of a little bit free and loose and easy, and we just tell everybody to come basically semi-clothed.
Yeah, exactly. But obviously Nikki didn't like that. So that's the kind of the end of that scene. Then we switch across to the chapel, and then we're introduced to, I've already forgotten the guy's name.
Michael.
Michael's
professor.
Yeah, the professor's wife.
Yeah.
Do they Leela? Do they specify the ethnicity in the
script? She is described as we find out that she's born in Iran, moved to the UK age 11, so she's anglicized Persian.
Okay, and it's kind of implied because the professor, I can't remember if he does that earlier on, but this sort of references his love of Persian poetry, or reads out some Farsi or something like that.
That's right. He reads from the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and that, in a sense, is a kind of sort of very gigglesome kind of thing to do. It's a classic boomer cliche. I think that the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam was very popular in the 70s as a kind of seduction manual sort of thing that you would. It's like, I think Bruce Robinson once said that if you read Keats to a woman, she'd kind of fall into your arms, and the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam was sort of thought of in a similar way, that if you brought this stuff out, that you would sort of have an air of profundity, and you would smolder, and women would just fall at your feet. So it's a bit of a joke, I think.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Good context. Then the and it's kind of revealed about his wife's circumstance. She's a scientist working in a lab on another part of the campus, but they're all old friends. They all knew each other from back in the day, basically.
Yeah.
I was trying to remember if anything interesting happened in that chat. The party's going on at the same time, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, they're sort of hovering, having a sort of cheeky glass of red, and doing a bit of that kind of reminiscing that people do once they get over the age of 40. We were young once, and they're sort of talking about this character who died in the past, this character who was murdered. This was a friend that they went to university with back in the 80s, and we suspect she's been murdered on the grounds of the college, and this is one of the sort of keystone parts of the play that haunts the characters, and they discuss her, and there's feelings that are mixed in the group that Joe, our main character, is kind of, in a way, sort of sentimental, but it doesn't feel kind of real. And Leela, who probably knew the murdered character Alison, we find her name is, Leela, who knew her a bit better, is kind of angry that she wasn't memorialized sufficiently. Apparently she's got, on the playing field of the college, she's got a little plaque that that commemorates her life. And then you have a conversation about essentially it's talking about this problem of violence against women, I suppose. And Joe needles Leela that she isn't really political. You sort of stay in your lane, don't get involved in this stuff. You're not. And Leela sort of does lash back a bit, saying, "Well, I escaped from Iran during the revolution, and I've come and made a life here, so I do know about politics." But there's obviously some sort of hint of a bit of a ruction with that friendship in that way, that Joe sees herself as the kind of earnest, trailblazing firebrand academic, and she slightly patronizes Leela, who is just this, this just STEM subject kind of character who just works away in her laboratory, fastidiously doing epidemiology, I think, or something like that. And we learned from the conversations that Joe was once a journalist, and probably a broadcast journalist. It's implied that she was working for something like the BBC, and she rejected journalism for the comfort of this cozy job, which was given to her by Leela's husband, Michael, the director of the college.
Yes.
And Joe is having this sort of midlife crisis moment. She's yearning for authenticity. This kind of, the past is, gone, and life has kind of slipped through your fingers while you're wanting to be a trailblazing firebrand, political, feminist radical, but you had to settle for the compromise of a cozy, well-paid job in a college. So there's a bit of that.
Terrible life.
Yeah. Awful, appalling, and
exactly.
At the same time, they're haunted by a bit of survivor guilt for their murdered friend. So there you go.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Well, certainly Leela is, at least I'd say. Okay,
yeah.
Then we switch back to Nikki and the Welsh girl, and it's the day after the party, and the long and the short of it is the Welsh girl said there's a whole very clumsy setup about getting the morning after pill, but the whole thing is just a vehicle to explain that the Welsh girl had sex while she was unconscious, which Nikki leaps upon and points out the non-consensual nature of it, thus making it rape. And it encourages her to report it to the authorities, basically, and to start that discussion, and then ultimately helps her get the morning after pill. And that's how that scene kind of wraps up. I don't know if there's anything else you want to mention about that.
That's the principal dilemma of the play being set up. Yeah, she's had a night. She's had, as they say, she's had bad sex with the college Chad, basically. The sort of poster boy.
Because it's implied that he's like quite sporty and quite good looking, etc.
Yeah. And the thing that Nikki does is she sort of sniffs it as the journalistic instinct comes up, and she thinks, well, here's a moral crusade, and you sense that she starts to slightly manipulate Paige, to sort of forensically, execute the allegation in some way, gather a bit of evidence. And, it's funny because Nikki initially congratulates Paige, says, well, he's quite a desirable boy, and then as soon as Paige reveals that this bad sexual etiquette, as they said in the Julian Assange case, has happened, she's impressed at first, but now she's really out to get this guy with a sort of, the fire of the zealot. And Paige freaks out, and essentially Nikki helps her deal with the immediate problem of getting the morning after pill.
Yes, exactly. I mean, she practically salivates at the thought of that happening, basically.
And you could sort of see the trajectory of the play coming from that point as well, can't you?
Yes.
Really? I mean, I whispered to you that thing about, however much you hate journalists, etc., etc. We all know the saying now, but that's what we're beginning to feel, because you're sensing that sort of, toothy kind of aggression is being summoned in Nikki.
Exactly. And then the first half finishes up with Nikki turning up at Joe's office and trying to kind of escalate things, and sort of Joe downplaying it a little bit, pointing out that the student in question hasn't made an official complaint, and that that there are kind of routes to go down that have already been set up by the college.
Yeah.
Is there anything else? I remember.
Well, yeah. Let me just see where we are, because we're whipping through a few scenes there. Do you want to go sort of as a sort of? Let me just have a look.
I want to get to the end of the first half, and then we can kind of chat about some of those points. Yeah.
That's more or less the conflict, in a nub, isn't it? Really, that the point is the tension is established between Nikki, who wants to be the new firebrand radical, and Joe, the kind of slightly tired, disillusioned radical, who is now in a position of responsibility, and the tension,
the gilded cage of her cushy job.
That's it, yeah. But it threatens to be disrupted by this new this young Zoomer who wants to sort of take it even further, and make a federal case out of it.
No, exactly. So that's the kind of initial setup. This idea of it's a prestigious university that's kind of broken away from its traditions. It's trying to modernize, but from Nikki's point of view, things are not in the right place. And even though there have been concessions made in Joe's time, there are big issues, and then all of that's culminated in this specific rape. So, I mean, what was your immediate thoughts about some of the characters? I'm starting to review in my head live, or interpret things based on some of those interview points, and I wonder whether there's an element where she's trying her best to not have a one position about things, but trying, from she was saying, I believe in the neutrality of playwriting, again, which is laughable, but whether she's trying to kind of present a couple of different opinions, setting them up together like spinning tops, and seeing how they kind of bump together, and what's the friction. And I think essentially the different opinions really are, like you said, the boomer professor who has this kind of, he sort of mentions his kind of love of the chapel and knows all about it, etc. And again, his idea that the chapel is kind of repurposed into this new multicultural space, or the people having sex in the chapel, really offends him. And I thought that was a really interesting character, because again, it's just this idea of he is the perfect boomer, basically. This idea of someone who's inherited this great tradition, but at the same time is like the key architect in its destruction, ultimately, from what it was certainly from a traditional sense, rightly or wrongly, about the kind of the women's side of things. I mean, I don't know if it's intentional, but I think there is some irony that the very fact that women were allowed into the college, that this thing, this all occurred, and the murder occurred at the same time. So there's I don't know how intentional that is. So that's one character I would say. You've got Joe, who again is that kind of second or third wave, feminist, doing some of those kind of big movements early on, that kind of classic marching in the street, that kind of loud activist. But then also the writer has her kind of portrayed almost like this she's almost defanged in some kind of ways by both her profession and by her age itself. That she's no longer she is no longer the firebrand, even if she thinks of herself. And then Nikki obviously is this kind of this new wave of women coming through who want to also partly want to make their mark on the world. So again, that Like, I think the writers keen that there was a few points in some of the discussions with teachers when they're in the chapter together about, they were sort of criticizing Nikki and her version of feminism, specifically in the fact that it's there's like a naivety to it, or the fact they kind of pull sources from the internet, which we'll find later, like the importance of that. So there's this kind of skin deep nature to their feminism, that it's a posing thing as opposed to like actually being oppressed. So I think the writer hasn't come in with like a bulldozer, so to speak, and said, here is the one perfect opinion, but has tried to set up a couple of these different opinions, each with their various nuances, positive or negative, as she sees them. Although again, talking about the neutrality of the writer, in my mind, that there are so many other positions missing from this. This is kind of like, imagine a world that your Islington living Guardian reader could only imagine, and it's basically those three worldviews: the kind of the boomer managed decline, the old firebrand, and the young firebrand. Those are the three positions you're allowed to have, basically.
Yes.
Any comment on that, or the characters?
Yeah, well, as I say, I mean, I think I'm trying to be sort of charitable coming away from this, because I mean, I said to you early on, I hate all the characters on the stage within the first 3 minutes, but pulling back, the playwright, she's done a workmanlike job, as you say, trying to give the different points of view and steelman they each try to steelman their cases in a way, but what you sense the main dynamic of the play is the entanglements of people who are both idealistic and compromised and jaded by their experience in the older characters, for example, and not wanting, in the older characters, the boomer and the Gen X characters, to sort of go through with this scorched earth kind of approach of the Zoomer zealotry embodied in the Nikki character. So they've both got this sentimental attachment to a past, but they've already destabilized that attachment in their own minds. I mean, there's a very key example that I remember, that the Jo character, while she herself was this third wave feminist, she's got this attitude to the students of saying to the Nikki character, you need to touch grass, you need to have fun, you need to calm down. But one of the key scenes at the beginning of the play is she's having to try and discipline Gerald, who's been a part of a group of students who've pinched a portrait from another college, and they've dragged it around with them on a drinking binge, and they've damaged the portrait inadvertently by trying to drag it over a barbed wire fence. And you can't sort of, on the one hand, give out the message of, well, you go and get up to a few hijinks and have fun, and then when people, students do have fun, then you're in this quandary then, because you're not happy with the way they are traducing, if you like, the quietude and tradition of the college. So it's very difficult. As I said, it's this kind of this sort of libertarian instinct in the Jo character, that says, you've got to kind of go and have an experience and be exuberant and live life. But the Nikki character is someone who is struggling to do that, and probably can't understand the mixed messages that are coming from Jo, who is admittedly quite confused, really, in her thinking.
I just want to jump in there and just say, because again, all the way through, I was trying to think, who is the writer projecting onto, who does she see herself most as, and again, I ironically think she sort of is outside of those two characters. She's intentionally chosen an older kind of Gen Xer or like late boomer for one of the characters, and then a Zoomer for the other. And you know what their age from the kind of the language they talk about and the words they use. And again, she's relatively close to my age, so like, we both remembered a time before the internet. We remember, the early noughties, for example. people would still go out and have fun. And again, it was sort of in the wake of the kind of like 90s ladette culture, but it wasn't as bad. Like girls would go out and have fun. So I think all of the kind of her talking, her as Jo telling the Zoomer to have fun is, I bet she partied really fucking hard when she was younger, and that's her kind of one of her comments on this kind of puritanical scold feminism. That being said, also the things like kind of the blog, and we'll go into this in the second half maybe more, and the word, specifically the word rape culture, which she uses in the second half, that Nikki uses, it was a word that was popular with like millennial feminism in the like 2010s basically. So there's a little bit of herself in both of these characters. It's almost like the two angels, or I should say the two devils on her shoulders, pulling her this way and that. And in my mind, it's almost, I wonder if it's almost like it feels like a bit like an inner monologue for the different characters in her head.
You're right. No, there's a confliction that's being, just assigned and projected onto different characters to play out that particular quandary of the problem being that Jo is now in the senior position, has to be a custodian of something like tradition, and at the same time she wants to encourage a feisty spiritedness. She's very much these girls have to be kind of emancipated and given all the possibilities in the world. At the same time, some of them are baffled by what possibilities they can actually enact. The Nikki character is interesting because she obviously, she just wants to have her own riot. She wants to have her own story. She wants to have her own blazing political career in some way, and she's bright and wants to start early. And the thing is that she doesn't have the the capacity for rear vision that Jo is going to have, and say, well, this way of thinking that you have, it seems to alienate people. It gets you into trouble with people. The boys are all mocking you and making fun of you. You're kind of you're motoring that sort of situation into being where you're alienating yourself from people by your kind of political purity, let's say. And Jo is a bit more seasoned.
This is why I keep thinking of this as a play, and she's trying to speak to simultaneously older feminists and younger feminists, and again the whole way through it's kind of like creating a dialogue with them and saying like youngers, you're not going to achieve anything by having this kind of zealot like attitude, and the importance of bringing the guys on board like they did in previous periods, and then for the older, comfortable feminists, about getting out of your comfort zone and helping to organize. And maybe like, is there anything else to say for the first half? Because maybe that's a good segue into kind of what happens.
Yeah, that's fine. That's kind of enough. We set up the principal conflict, which really is what sort of burns throughout the play. That's the main theme here. The other characters are kind of ancillary in a sense, and they serve that particular conflict.
Also, just like to say, I think the professor is an Electrian figure of the writer's father. That's my theory. I have no proof of this whatsoever. But this idea of the kind of the rich bumbling kind of respecting culture, who tries to mean well or whatever, but ultimately fails. I think, especially when you mentioned her going to private school or whatever, I do wonder what her, what was the dad like?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a noticeable thing that the male characters in the play that are on stage are kind of both enfeebled in their own way. The professor is sort of ineffectual, and the young chap Gerald is just callow, and he hasn't got any kind of map for how to socialize. For example, he fixates on the character Paige. We sort of sense that he fancies Paige a bit, and as we see in the sort of second half, the professor tries to give him a bit of advice in a kind of fatherly way, but they're both men who are kind of a little bit lost. The professor, realizing that the sands are shifting under his feet, and Gerald just, trying to get along, like lots of young men you see now, that they just kind of haven't, had any useful, manful guidance. Let's say, the one character that may, have some sort of quality that we don't see, of course, is the character who is accused of the rape, who's off stage.
That's
And
yeah,
no
that's an
other men
interesting
come in.
yeah, that's an interesting point. I just want to say one other little miniature plot thread is the fact that Gerald is a Muslim. It was implied that he wanted the multi-faith prayer room for his prayer, but then has changed his mind on it, and he wants to be one of the lads now. Is what it's implied? So
that's right.
This is a kind of like one of those forgotten plot points. I feel like where she's desperately trying to beef up some of the male characters in terms of interest, and this is always like, that there's this playing second fiddle. This is about the 10th fiddle plot wise. The kind of Muslim element, totally underutilized and not done well at all.
But the hook, there's a hook in that. There's a hook in that, though, that goes back earlier to the conversation that Gerald and Joe have. And Gerald says the reason he doesn't want to use the multi-faith prayer room is because he knows that Joe is going to open it up to great fanfare, and then she's going to get Gerald to come and stand in front of it, and she can do a picture and use it for her kind of white liberal woman PR to say, look, we're diverse and welcoming. And that's what Gerald is wary of. He says he's coming to the college. She questions him about his devotion to Islam. And he says, well, really, I'm coming over here. It's a little bit like the Amish Rumspringa. I'm coming over to just kind of let my hair down before I, go back to Malaysia and have to knuckle down and, be, fully devout. So I'm coming here to just really have fun. And I don't really want you to make allowances for me. He sort of says in a speech, I've come here to sort of experience this traditional culture on its own terms.
There's interesting, and again, another little kind of morality point there for kind of boomer feminists. Yes, you may be good on the women question, but are you good on the Islam and multi-faith question as well? So again, there's so many lessons to be learned all the way through this, Simon. I felt really educated.
Well, it hints that the Joe character is basically a little bit exploitative, when it comes to just
I think just it's like fundamentally racist. I think they were basically implying, happy to like roll out the brown person when she needs to. That's what she basically said she was doing, and she didn't say no to it. So.
There's just a little anecdote I'm going to relate to this. I always tell these little Simon life stories, but this is very like I went about just over 25 years ago. I went to a Territorial Army Open Day in Chelsea at the Duke of York's barracks, as it then was. And I was just chatting and looking around and looking at the soldiers and stuff. And it was very conspicuously obvious that there was a black soldier who was very prominent in all of the kind of displays they were doing. And I sort of got chatting to him, took him aside at one point and said, were you asked deliberately to come here today? And he sort of quietly said, yeah, I was actually. And I said, do you know why? And he said, yes.
Oh, poor guy.
Yeah, he was a nice enough chap. He was just being used.
Yeah, standard.
People are. Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, let's hit up part
Act
two. Act 2. Do you want to kick us off?
Yeah. So, I mean, we got the play text, and I shared that with you. And I think there's a little bit of a lapse in my memory here as to what was happening in the action in the theatre, because I thought there's a divergence between the play text and what we actually saw. But the way the scene plays out at the beginning of Act 2 is there's a sort of a duet between Paige and Nikki, and they are. It's a sort of a very emblematic scene. It's not necessarily a realistic scene. They're going through screeds of essentially old bawdy songs, these traditional, like, rugby songs and, things like that. They're all kind of, it's obviously sort of heavy-handedly, making the point that, there's a sort of popular cultural tradition of you might say misogynistic songs, and in the text it's all there. I couldn't remember how it was done in the theatre, funny enough, when we came away, but I think there was a kind of montage effect of them doing the lines from these songs, and there were various of these songs which I've noted down. But there were things like The Good Ship Venus, things like that, and All the Nice Girls Love a Candle, Chelsea Ranger, which is apparently a football song, which is a bit rude, Roll Your Leg Over, The Chastity Belt, The Ball of Kirrimure, the Engineers song, and there was an allusion to a song that was sung at a Canadian university a few years ago, which is, it's kind of all about sort of it starts off with a traditional English folk song, which is let me just look up the title of it. It was bear with me, it's The Cuckoo's Nest, I think it's called. The old British folk song, The Cuckoo's Nest. So essentially it's a kind of, as I was walking one morning in May, I met a pretty fair maid, and unto her did say, and from there the song declines into a kind of bawdy piece about the cuckoo's nest, which is obviously a sort of euphemism for the lady bits, and then they run into this succession of all these other kind of vulgar songs, and it gets worse and worse throughout. They're sort of cruder and cruder, and this is just to sort of say an emblematic scene to show that there's this sort of thread running through a sort of popular laddish culture that is objectifying women and being crude and rude. That's the nature of just that first scene, and then it moves on into essentially Paige, the Welsh girl, and Nikki, the journalist. They meet with Leela, the Persian woman who is the scientist, and essentially there's a big conversation about these bawdy songs, because they've found the songs in an old college book, which is a sort of one of these traditional hymnals that's kept in the college, and they have a real problem with this, and they're sort of saying, look at this is terrible, and Leela is giving them a little bit of trying to give them a bit of a sober talk. And there's that line, I don't know if you remember, I said to you, it was a little bit like a line in a documentary. She's trying to calm the girls down, and she says to them, look, by the early 90s, all the major battles in feminism had been won, and it sounded almost a little bit like an Adam Curtis kind of a line as well. And sort of, do you know what I mean? It's a sort of curious.
It was pretty funny at that point. It was odd. Simon, can I say, am I right in thinking that none of those like bawdy poems actually got read out, because they're in this? Obviously, they're in the play text, but I don't remember them. I don't think they happened. I don't think it happened.
Well, I don't think it happened either. That's the thing. But I couldn't quite, if it may have just gone into this first scene, you see. But that was the subject of that scene, that they picked up this old college hymnal book. The main point in it was that Leela's husband, Professor Michael, had also contributed to this book. So there's this implication that he's complicit in this rape culture, which Nikki has talked about being on this campus. And that is again lifting the tension a bit, and Leela, who is Michael's wife, is trying to calm this down a bit, and they have this conversation about Leela's experiences in Iran, about she had some relatives who were executed for challenging regime power, and it ends up that in fact Leela's testing them a bit to see sort of how committed they are to making waves with using this issue of this terrible rape as a kind of political platform. And what we find is actually Leela supports them completely and wants to give them her laboratory rooms as a bit of a campaign base.
See, I think they change. I'm trying to remember back now, because I'm pretty sure they didn't do the blog post until afterwards, but until the second act. So I think, but I think before this scene, they've already released the blog post, because this is them sort of gearing up to campaign. So I think one pivotal thing that was missing is the fact that basically Nikki goes out and releases like an open letter talking about the rape,
Yeah.
without permission, just not naming anyone at all. The Welsh girl gets annoyed and Joe gets annoyed, but eventually the Welsh girl comes around and says, yeah, let's create a campaign over it, kind of thing, because they end up
Yeah.
having loads of positive responses.
Yeah.
And then this is kind of like part of the kind of campaign trail, is that leader now gets on board.
Yes, yes. Essentially, she's, as you say, Nikki's put out this blog post describing the situation without naming anyone, but heavily implying who's involved. And so therefore we now know that this information is out there, and all over the place women are sharing the story, and it's beginning to become, it's having a surge of virality. And this sort of is a sort of exciting little thing that they're both building together at this point. To raise awareness of the situation,
And they're getting in loads of like other rape stories from all over the world.
Yeah, and so the thing builds, and it's a sort of a determined kind of activist resolve is formed, and they decide to sort of run with this, and it quickly surges, and what happens is that at this point, during this kind of scene where they're beginning to plan all this stuff, the mother of the boy who's been accused comes in, and obviously Gerald, the young Malaysian lad, has led her to them, and there's a confrontation between the mother of the boy and Nikki, who is driving this thing.
Yes, yeah, and again, she's kind of like pointing out that there have been many cases where people have been accused of stuff, and then it turns out that it wasn't true. Again, I feel like her character, again, is the writer attempting to be impartial. This is the viewpoint of the people that have been incorrectly accused of rape and have had the consequences of that. Although it's still seen through the feminist view, it's not seen through the boy's view. It's seen through the mother's view, which again I think is interesting. So again, this idea of we don't really hear a male voice through the entire play.
They're ventriloquized by female framings.
Yeah. Now I'm trying to remember other important parts of the second, the second act quickly, but essentially, Joe and Leela have a big fallout about what's happening, and Leela's like, I never liked you anyway, which is, that was a ridiculous thing. Would you really hang out with someone for like 40 years? I don't know. Maybe this is.
Well, the motive is you find out that essentially what's happened is that in the second act there's a tension with Joe and Professor Michael, essentially, that this is bringing bad heat on the college, and Michael is urging Joe to find a way out, to be conciliatory, and maybe even give these girls a sort of endorsement for what they're doing with their campaign, as I said, quotes, to raise awareness. And one of the things that emerges during their conversations is that Joe reveals that Michael has been a bit of a cheeky lover boy in his past, and that information is potentially there to use should she be put under pressure, because Michael is essentially going to threaten with sacking her at that point. And so when Leela later reveals that she didn't like Joe, part of that unraveling of that history is that, well, you threatened my husband, and that's put me in this position now, and I just have to I have to stick with with my family and everything I've built up, and you're trying to sort of, again, carry out your own crusade, but at the expense of the people around you. That's roughly her contention.
I'm just going to wrap up this last the second act, because there's a lot of talking, but not in terms of like bigger things that happens. The campaign sort of blows up more.
Yeah.
Essentially, Joe gets forced out of the board.
Yeah.
/ resigns at the same time. The school ends up getting sued by the mum. I'm trying to remember what happens to Nikki.
Essentially, it ends with that sort of scene, that sort of very emblematic scene at the end where she plants the tree in the playing field. She kind of, the campaign goes off. It has consequences. Paige has to leave the college, in a sort of pall of shame. Gerald, who fancied Paige, is given his marching orders, and Paige says, "I'm not interested in you." So everybody kind of is. It's a story of everybody ending up equally unhappy in some way. And the last scene is
one little revelation is that Gerald chose Paige in the Who Would You Do contest at the beginning, but then allowed his friends to get in there, basically.
Yeah, it's horrible, really. But and so everybody is older, slightly more wizened, but unhappier. And in the final scene, Nikki uproots a tree from somewhere in the college grounds and plants it in the center of the playing field, which is the site of the student murder of 30, 40 years before. In order, as she's saying, to give that, to remember that woman. It's essentially about violence against women, and she wants to memorialize that with something that's going to make people sit up and look. And Gerald says to her, "But they're only going to take it down." And she says, "Well, I'm going to just plant it again and again and again until I succeed." So it's a sort of pie into student activism and that sort of zeal of youth. That things will only change if you impress yourself forcefully on people and make their lives, kind of thoroughly miserable. And it feels like the playwright does give a kind of tacit nod to that. It's that thing, as I said, in that third wave feminism, they talked about being difficult women, a lot. And that's what the Nikki character is there to kind of symbolize, that everything has to move on, and the old have to lick their wounds and reflect on their failures, but the new younger generation have to sort of push things forward in some way. And you have this slightly odd scene where she plants this tree, and then the play just kind of fades to black, and that's it. And we're left with the sort of quite fast unraveling of what was Joe, the main character's career and life, and she's left to reflect on what she did wrong, and there's various aspects to that she brings up, but she's kind of ambivalent about this new student generation politics.
I just want to say that the kind of use of the tree, that there is a real trend for what I call dirt under the boards, where they love to have soil hidden under the stage. I've seen it 10 times. It's such a terrible trope. Please, for the love of Christmas, can we stop placing soil underneath the theatre stage? Just put the tree on there. You don't have to bring the soil as well. I don't know. It's just they make it to be like this amazing reveal or whatever. But the scene at the end was in some ways the cheesiest bit of like tree acting, where the object was substantially lighter than she was making it out to be, and it obviously looked like that. It was the funniest thing ever.
And she was hefting it on stage with these kind of sexualized grunts, that was sort of very, very meant to be obviously some kind of. She's handling this long wooden object, and you think, okay, the symbolism is really heavy at this point.
Oh, so I think you're reading far too much into that side.
Planting the tree,
terrible. Planting the seed.
She's found her own phallus, and she's sighting it firmly.
Yeah, vertically up, powerfully up. Yes. Okay, what are the themes of the second half, would you say, basically?
It's as I say, it's more and more this sense of the entanglement that people have, the conflict between, purity of ideals and ambitions, and the pragmatism that overtakes us simply as we get older, and the conflicts in our sense of responsibility for what we must do, and also plainly the fear of what we must avoid. That, essentially, when it comes down to it, as we know, people very often they just don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want their careers destroyed, and ultimately they will act in a fairly ruthless way when it comes to that. um, and at the same time, with the younger characters, it's the sense of being unable to um to sympathize with the older characters. It's a sort of sins of they talk about the sins of the fathers kind of stories. Well, this is the sins of the mothers, really, isn't it? It's the
Yes,
it's
yeah,
the
definitely.
the fourth wave feminist, let down by her older sisters, and she resolves to fight and challenge them because they've sold out, man. that's essentially where she's at. And as I said to you, I whispered to you that it's the indictment of the boomer truth regime, isn't it? It's that, that Gen X character wanting to have all that kind of indulgence, of that paradigm, that
Mm.
sort of sense of joyous kind of indulgence and liberty, and at the same time not being able to square that with the strictures of things like institution, tradition, heritage, continuity, where you can't really give out the mixed message as easily as you think you can. That's sort of Jo's conflict, that she sort of wants these students to behave well, but at the same time she can't quite reconcile that with her own sort of sense of fiery narcissism. Really, that's what seems to overtake these characters. They're, Jo is the sort of narcissist who's burned out, and Nikki is the sort of narcissist who's only just getting going. And these kind of surges of political activism, um, become this narcissistic supply, as Ed Dutton would say, for these characters who essentially are just dislocated in many ways. And that's a lot of the sense of when you watch the play, the way the setting is so sparse, the sense of the offstage world is non-existent, and the characters, they all seem lost in some way, if you know what I mean. They all, the Page character especially, you look at her and she wears these sort of long jumpers which have long sleeves that cover her hands, and she looks kind of helpless all the time. And the Gerald character is a bit like this as well. There's a sort of helplessness that's a
Mm.
factor of how wrapped up they are in these big ideas. Paige has this big idea of being a computer scientist, and she worked terribly hard to get to college, and now it's all been ruined. Jo had this idea of being, a political, activist in her own life, but she sold out. Michael had this idea of I suppose being this custodian of tradition, and now it's being harmed by this new wave of student enthusiasm for tearing up the past. Um, and Nikki is frustrated with confronting the fact that people just don't respond to this kind of stuff, and that she alienates herself from the rest of society, and so it's a lot of people ending up, as I say, just frustrated and sad.
But also, like, what's the outcome? It's basically like the college is left in irrepute.
Mm.
Like, the position of women has been weakened in the institution, and like, has even the memory of the dead woman been like maintained? Because it's almost like a futile act.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of like, there's interesting points here around the kind of the conflict between pragmatism and ideology, where again Jo is the pragmatist feminist versus the ideological zeal of Nikki. And it's kind of like, yes, she's successful in bringing awareness to a thing, but also probably fundamentally destroying it in the process. You know what I'm saying? She
Yeah.
destroy the college's name. Less people will go there. There'll be less funders and donors, and it's kind of like there is symbology in the painting, or the painting that's damaged, because that's like, she's like a famous woman who tried to get women into colleges, for example.
Yeah.
So there is kind of like an element of this a symbolic tarnishing of the great mothers of the past in some of these destructive acts. So it's interesting. Like I think from just a pure pro perspective, it isn't just a here is the truth, and it's this extremely woke version of feminism, and you either like it or you lump it. It's trying to kind of pull out these different threads. But my criticism is always going to be that it's kind of giving you, 2 or 3 versions of a similar truth. And again, it's kind of, I go back to that point about, like, why did the college have to accept, here's a question: are men allowed to have spaces by themselves? For example, and but the real reason why they're not allowed to have the space is because it's about power, basically, isn't it? Ultimately, the and parity of power, or even overpower. And I think the idea of like the kind of the notions of power inside the piece as well. So there's kind of like different various criticisms of kind of like I said, the kind of the consequences of wokeism, etc. I mean, the other thing I would say is that a lot of it felt very. I kept going on this idea of anachronistic. Like, doesn't she know that woke's being put away? Doesn't she know that that Nikki has already been fired from? Nikki went on to join a DEI unit at Microsoft, but she's just been sacked. Don't you know that these annoying Zoomers are being flushed down the loo as we speak? And at the same time, even her own brand of, I would describe it as kind of Fleabagian, intellectual, kind of a little bit sneering feminism. It just feels ancient and old. Even things like talking about like rape culture, etc. Like, how can you claim that universities are filled with rape culture when no one's having sex anymore? For example, that's the real issue, is that people aren't having enough sex. Ironically, maybe as a consequence because of some of these things itself. So while it's trying to pull out these interesting points, it almost feels like it's like lost in a time zone from a decade ago.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's like a review play of the sort of campus politics of the last 10 years, not the moment, as it were.
And in some ways, I feel like, actually, it's like, this is millennials getting old. I saw this, and it's kind of like, I felt old watching this, because that isn't the reality of what students are going through right now. And she's just regurgitating her own experience in some ways, which is just irrelevant to modern time. And one thing I would say, another thing I would say as well, is that again with the male characters, that I appreciate her attempt to create whatever. It's that stupid. A lot of when reading out her descriptions and interviews, the whole thing seemed very Reddit, if I'm honest with you. And one of the big kind of Reddit memes is that 3 women having a discussion, not about sex or periods or other men or whatever. There's like there's a name of a feminist writer who kind of highlights that. But that itself is like it's quite a big meme that was popular like 10 years ago. And like, I appreciate the fact of what she's trying to do, which is to create a play by women for women, so that women can be seen. I understand that, But then that
that's it.
that concept itself though is it's old hat, and it's been done, and it's kind of like you're trying to present this as like a pioneering piece of theater, but
Exactly, in an age when we never stop hearing about it.
it's I think it's just a fundamentally tired concept. Itself, and then like I think that the more interesting things on the male side are, number one, the critique of the boomer male, which is this. He's again sort of stuck in the past, but brings in the destruction of the future. I thought that was one of the most amazing critiques ever.
He has he has this kind of fawning. He has a conversation with Gerald, doesn't he? He discovers Gerald praying in the chapel, and he sort of stumbles in on him, and he's instantly apologetic and cringing, he tries to give Gerald seduction advice about, well, what you've got to do is get a book of poetry, especially Persian poetry.
It's literally so pathetic. He's the kind of guy, I said to you, he's the kind of guy who lives in the cock shed. Just absolutely hated his character. Also, the fact that he didn't suspend Gerald for having Muslim prayer in the Christian holy space again, it summed up so much about that boomer mentality or whatever, where it's kind of like he has the vestige of caring about the institution, but fundamentally, when a Muslim is literally praying in a sacred and sanctified holy place, like that really pisses me off, basically, as a Christian. And it's kind of like, but it does show that's exactly how they think and how they feel. I thought that was quite good. I thought Gerald's character, again, there's interesting stuff there, but it's the wrong play. And the interesting question is about for Gerald, authenticity as a person versus like modern multiculturalism. We're asked. We have had hundreds of thousands of people foisted on us without being asked, and we claim that through a process of answering questions and general knowledge that they are somehow transformed into British people, but at the same time we require that they retain their uniqueness and individuality at the same time. And you see that in Gerald's character, where simultaneously, like, he wants to fit in with everyone else. It's the natural thing to try and do, but his otherness is constantly being pulled out and highlighted, thus leaving him ultimately separated. So there's an interesting thing about the fundamental intellectual failure of multiculturalism as a concept in the small bit there. Sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. I want to just support what you're saying there. It is that sense that when he identifies in the play that the Jo character wants to use him to kind of buttress her liberal credentials, the writer herself has kind of done the same thing with the character. He's not really well defined. He's come from Malaysia and he's Muslim, but he seems just like completely anglicized, really. He's English accented. Obviously, he's perhaps been here quite a while. He doesn't feel like he's an overseas student come to study. He's a sort of, he's an anywhere person, as it were. But as a result, that he has his little speech about wanting to see the tradition and rootedness of this culture, and then go back and straighten his act out. But he does feel like, as you say, he's a kind of just an annex for the playwright to display her sense of liberal inclusivity in this very narrow, ill-defined sense of Gerald, as I say, who is a kind of another lost man in some way. And part of that's aggravated by another major theme, that it's this fracture between generations in the form of this digital parasociality. That on the one hand, you've got the boomer and the Gen X, as you say, who we were sort of pre-internet. You had this notion of real relationships, and now we're living much more in this age, as we are now, interacting through the internet in this digital parasocial way. We have these relationships with people, but in the sense that they're real, they're only real at the points we come to meet in real life. Otherwise, we're building up these whole conversations and identities and forums based on these linkages that are through social media. And this is the sort of crisis that, you know, Paige and Nikki have in the play, when Paige is really just manipulated by Nikki to become some of the currency of social media. And Paige's complaint really at the end is that, you know, she wasn't being treated like a real person. She wasn't asked, as it were. And that's the sort of generational divide.
Just one thing on the technology again. I think there's interesting threads about like authorship and like truth. So again, like the mum pointing out that, you know, you don't, like, these are just comments on a blog. Like, how can you trust them? You know, ideas of like regret and social status. You know, in the modern era for women, for example, stuff around like people being addicted to comments and likes. You know, again, I think that's like people chasing that dopamine hit of the like button. Again, I think there's something really interesting that again gets touched on for a second, but totally unexplored. But I sort of want to round out the discussion now with some kind of some final thoughts, Simon, or if there was anything else you desperately wanted to touch upon.
Well, no, it's just one of those. It's one of those plays where, you know, I was talking to you about, you know, you used to have this period sort of back in the late 70s, 80s, in the 90s, of what you call the sort of state of the nation play. And it's where you would have, you know, often writers based at the National Theatre, people like David Hare, David Edgar, and Peter Flannery, plays like Maydays, Our Friends in the North, you know, stuff where it was the sort of big picture of, you know, the political context of the time and how that parses into the lives of ordinary people who are kind of suffering under whatever, you know, regime moment is happening. And this is a sort of an attempt to do that in a sort of smaller scale, that she's kind of done all this collation and research about these issues of you know, feminism, identity, you know, sort of alienation, social alienation between generations, between individuals, and she's, as you say, kind of in a sense just summarizing stuff that does feel very dated and passé now, and it's again, it just feels like, you know, another journeyman piece on her way towards bigger commissions for, you know, bigger theatres and so on. And it plays kind of lip service to a sense of duty that she will serve a social function as a playwright. Hence me bringing in, you know, the idea of her funding in the beginning, the prize that she won, you know, from the property development group who's interested in all the DEI stuff. So it feels kind of a bit, you know, painting by numbers, if I can sort of use that analogy. It doesn't feel current.
That would have been the real twist, is like finding out that it was an NGO backed, like an NGO backed like funding group funded the virality of the piece or something like that. That would have been a good stab in the back. But no, it's, I feel ultimately, it again has its moments, and I think as a play in its own right, as a moment in history, I think it's interesting to analyze. But the play itself, I think, just doesn't have any kind of it doesn't say anything new really, apart from maybe some of the kind of feminist tension things. But it's kind of still kind of like, you know, we're in this together, sisters. It's a kind of it's a correction to other women. So I mean, I would still rate it rather poorly, and I would give it 3 out of 5 normally, but then it loses an entire star for having a woman say "I'm a gamer" in it, which made me physically cringe. I physically almost died in my seat. Again, here's a good idea. You do something on like some kind of like 4chan femcel actual gamer, or a TikTok, a Twitch thought gamer. You know, those are the two actual gamer archetypes, not lost lamb Welsh Welsh girl taking up computer science because she just thought it'd be cool. There was a lot of stuff which just felt like she just totally out of touch with
Yeah, yeah,
what's
yeah.
happening now in reality. Again, like, have you ever met, like, I don't know, have you ever met anyone before? Sometimes I just feel like you're very, very closeted in the people that you speak to, and it's clearly, obviously, just other like
Yeah.
feminist women like yourself. So
I think so, yeah, and there is that. Therefore, there is that sort of tendency to recapitulate the same pain, and represent that time after time, in a sense, almost as they sense the woke is dying away, to keep it going, with re-injecting another kind of moment where it's almost like they're trying to create a sort of a sense of scandal or outrage. But as I said to you the other day, this is the notion of rape culture on campuses was something that Milo Yiannopoulos made his name on about 7 years ago now, when he was doing his college tour, and he was digging up all kinds of stats from the National Institute of Justice in America, saying, well, actually, most of the sexual violence on campuses is woman on woman. It's lesbians beating 10 bells out of each other in relationships. It wasn't that there was an endemic rape culture. But that's one of the scenes in the play where she goes out and she tries to find statistics to see whether Nikki's case about endemic rape culture is a real thing, and she doesn't seem to find it. But the play has a moment where Nikki says to Jo, well, look, I can't make the argument as well of you, but I feel this emotionally, and that's the important thing. This thing feels like it's happening to me and to other women as well, therefore, by extension. And so that's why you should take it at face value, not for any sense that it's real in any way. It's just important that we use it, as a vehicle for activism and for, as you say, power. Because these characters, as I say, they are. It's a play of modern narcissism. The relationships are entangled, but they are seeking, like the Nikki character, especially. She's kind of seeking a sort of form of fame, but it's one where she wants to sort of manipulate others. She wants to ventriloquize her arguments through others. That's why she becomes a journalist. That's what she wants to do. And in a sense, her ultimate goal is simply, will I get away with what I want to do? That's really all
there
she has.
There was something kind of based about, like, exposing that is just genuinely how journalists think. Again, that there is, do you know what I'm saying? There are these little glimmers and moments of interest, and it's kind of like, just the difference between like subpar writing and good writing would have been to pull those out in interesting and new ways. So I don't know, maybe she's got some potential for the future, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I'd probably score it the same as you, or maybe even less. I mean,
I know you're always. I'm always quite a generous critic. I don't like people like it. It wasn't like, again, I've seen some really bad things though, Simon. You see, I've seen some absolute dogs, and like I said, that there were really interesting moments, I think, and stuff that could have been good plays in their own right, but ultimately, I think we ended up with just like well-trodden ground, and So
do you remember I was laughing throughout quite a bit in the second half, especially? I was just sort of randomly laughing when nobody else was, and the reason why I realized it was because I felt I was laughing against the grain of the author's intent to kind of to scandalize us and stimulate us in some way, because mainly I was kind of laughing mainly at there was a sort of laughably naive self-diagnosing of these libtard characters. And you could just tell the way she'd written them, they had a complete lack of insight into their own, neurotic self-flagellation. Did you remember there was that line from Professor Michael? He said, well, we're the enemy too, or something, we,
this is what I'm saying.
He was
total cuck shed energy from him. He's in the cuck shed. He's saying how like pathetic and sad he is. It's just literally go out inside and just fucking kill yourself, dude. I'm just like, the worst kind of man. This is what I'm saying. In some ways, it's probably not intentional. It was one of the best examples of like the worst aspects of boomerism. And anyway, I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I want to mention. No, like I felt like the second half was way worse than the first. I think there was quite a few good setups. What I do want to know, Simon, is how was the intimacy coach? Sorry, what was it called again? The
the,
psychological.
the drama psychotherapist, I think it was. What's it? What's this?
Well, there was one sexual moment where the professor got sat on by
Oh yes, his wife in the
Layla.
chapel.
So was
Yeah.
I'm just asking, was that the trauma? Like, is it a trauma to have a large Persian woman sit on you? Basically, is that what he needed?
It could well be.
He needed
Yeah.
instant therapy for that moment.
I feel he wanted to leave the situation almost as much as I did. That's that's it.
We'll never know how. What's the woman's name?
Oh, what, Leela, or the actress's name?
No, the intimacy psychologist.
Oh, what was that? Wabria King.
Wabria King. We'll never know how
Wabria
King helped out, but I'm sure it was
No, fortunately.
really important. Really important.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
last anything to say? Last line.
I said to you, actually, it was just interesting seeing that kind of play where we did at the Almeida in Islington, which is it's always been that kind of it's like a hipper, more professional environment than Hampstead, but it's still essentially a sort of a socialist, a sort of enclave in inner London, and the way that these. It was interesting walking around Islington before the play and seeing these kind of sort of thrusting young people. As I said to you, all the girls in Islington seem to be on their way to the gym. They're all wearing gym wear in Islington, and you've got very similar kinds of boomer men, like Professor Michael in the play, walking. They're sort of walking expensive small dogs, and they're in tennis shorts. They're sort of middle-aged boomer rentier characters, and with floppy hair and pink shirts. And there was an aspect where it sort of reflected the weaknesses and frivolities of the play, but at the same time, Islington felt very disconnected from the kind of social concern that you were seeing in the play. It's a much different place from how I knew it when I lived in London, where it was the kind of classic place of bric-a-brac and antique shops and things like that, where people would sell you a kind of refurbished filing cabinet for £800. I saw you coming. Smile. Look very happy, but you sense that they're not, and it was sort of seemed like the play in a way in the first half. People want to be kind of competent and thrusting, but you sense their weakness very, very shallowly under the surface. And this thing in the play where I said the Nikki character, she was dressed in this kind of sort of frumpy, styleless, sexless Zuma couture. She was dressed in a sort of Fair Isle pullover and these baggy trousers. I thought, you just look like my granddad did in the 70s. You sort of weirdly, they kind of, a lot of the young women around Islington, they wander around with these sort of slightly dreamy, beatific smiles on them, a sort of happy vacancy. And either that or they were the kind of thrusting gym girl types, so it's just interesting to see that that kind of culture of London happening around this play. But this sort of play won't make it was raising some sort of salient issues that might be challenging, but it wouldn't in any sense challenge that world outside. It's outside of it at all.
Just on that, because I remember Islington of 10 years ago, and it was much more well turned out, much more wealthy, and if anything, I think walking outside was a shock for me, because it's kind of like essentially like Highgate in Islington, like that is the stomping ground of, like you said, the socialist Victorian middle class, like the last vestiges. Think of like your William Morris esque figures, small business owners turned socialist, etc. But it just felt like a place totally engulfed by demographic changes. And again, like, I just wonder if you brought like a young, well, interestingly, in the front row at the top, they had local students, like the little broccoli-haired Zoomers in the front row. And I would have loved to find out like what their opinion on the play was, because I think it would have been like them seeing I don't know, Sophocles or Aeschylus or something like that. You know, like literally like from another time and another place, because the realities of outside have totally like engulfed and changed the situation in a way that's so different. And again, like even this kind of protected bubble in London, I think is going to be swept away in the next. Like, what happens when all the boomers in Islington die? You know, it's held together by boomer cash right now.
Yes.
And I'd just be fascinated to see. And I think what we're witnessing is like this is a bit over the top, but like a bourgeois holocaust, basically. The Victorian middle class just totally crumbling and fading away. But then I wonder, like, how relevant is this stuff to the emergent people that remain, which is kind of like like working like aspirational working class, and the kind of the new emergent service worker London.
Yes.
Or the million. What does the milling Bamalian think of this? You know, just down the street. I don't think any of them care about it or would have any credence to it. So
and that's the comparison that I made. You know, like the way the play is framed with the cast watching the action that's going on stage. In that sort of Brechtian alienated way, as it is in the theatre, so it is outside the theatre, tying in with what you're saying there, that Islington is becoming, I mean, I use that term about where the cast are sitting, you know, sort of on the stage, but not part of it. And I use that term non-space. And that's a term that's used it was coined by a cultural theorist called Marc Auger. And he developed this word non-space to describe the phenomenon of modernity, where you get these spaces of transience that people pass through, but they have no linkage to. The classic example is things like airports, you know. So there is, if you like, a group of people in a place, there is collectivity, but there's no connection to it. And Islington, in a sense, is rapidly becoming a kind of non-place. You have these people I was describing all thrusting around, but they have no connection with the place at all. They're nothing to do with London. They're nothing to do with that place. There's no sense of continuity. The slightly ridiculous thing of the kind of, you know, the middle-aged men walking their expensive dogs around like it's their manor. They didn't sort of really look like people who'd ever been there for longer than 5 minutes, you know, and they sort of project a sense of deep ownership that isn't real, you know. And so, as you say, the bourgeois Holocaust, I mean, that's a good phrase. It's, you know, it's increasingly becoming a sort of cafe district with sort of shishi eateries and things. But all of the stuff of the past when I was there, you know, the sort of the shops full of old things, it's totally gone. It's been stripped away, and the people have been stripped away, and you are left with that kind of just eternal. It's about flows of as you say, what are those drivers that, you know, the takeaways, like
Albanian pizza delivery
at 3
drivers.
Yeah, exactly like that, you know. And as I say, the people begin to reflect that detachment. Like, as I say, the girls are all dressing in baggy jumpers and baggy sack trousers, and, you know, they're just looking kind of sexless and sort of detached. And it's, as I say, it's like the characters in the show. They're not connected with the place. They're not happy with where they are. They're not happy with who they are. And so, you know, as I said, when we were talking out in Islington, it was kind of the similarly joyless place, sort of earnest, but in this sort of, you know, coercive manner of modern scolding and restriction, and, you know, but the people still carry this self-important air that is faintly ludicrous. You know, again, it's this modern narcissism that ties into this thing in the play of political activism going with that as well. So that's how it sort of felt weird to me, in a way that, you know, the drama on the street was, in a sense, it could be read very similarly to the drama in the theatre. It's just, you know, it wasn't even sound and fury signifying nothing. It was just nothing.
Yeah. Well, one last thing I wanted to say just on that, the surroundings, was that like who are plays for these days, and I think it was interesting, if you like, we were in some ways, apart from the Broccoli Zoomers, we were the youngest men in the whole theatre, which is, you know, and we're not exactly spring chickens, I would say.
No,
but and the place was like half capacity as well. and it's just interesting. Like the it's the same for all of these off West End. The heartbeat of these places has been like rich boomers, and again, as they slowly kind of fade away, are those three new audiences that I mentioned beforehand really that interested in this? And I think as part of the bourgeois Holocaust, we're going to see a closure of these kind of venues, because I just can't see them surviving in the same kind of way. So anyway, like so maybe just as the play sort of entropically fell to nothing, so too shall the very theatre that it's there. But anyway, a rather sad end. But I just want to say thank you, Simon, for your time. It was really, as ever, masterful analysis. Do you want to plug anything before we finish?
No. Thank you for having me. Look out for any future Ferro Simon collabs that may come up, and I would just wish everybody a very pleasant evening.
Yes, thank you very much, and good night.